This lecture is going to be on very modern Thailand, and I'll try to explain to you the political turmoil that Thailand is under now. I don't want you to get the idea that Thailand is an unsafe place to visit, however. In the course of all this political turmoil, as far as I know, no foreigners have been hurt. They may have been inconvenienced, as you'll hear, but they have not been hurt. And in fact, I'm going to Thailand for 2 weeks at the end of the next cruise. And I have no doubt that I won't run into any problems. Thailand is a country of 66 million people. It has a per capita gross domestic product when you measure it on a purchasing power parity basis, trying to put it in the same measurement as all the other countries of the world, of about $8,000 a person. So if you recall my Malaysia lecture, or if you've heard it on the video, theirs is about 15,000. This is 8. But one of the problems that's caused all this political turmoil is there's now a growing disparity between the wealthy in Thailand and the relatively poor in Thailand, and that's become a problem. Their major trading partners are Japan, China, and the U.S., and they are the largest rice exporter. They still are. It's quite a rice bowl. I'm going to pick this story up in 1932. In 1932, Thailand became a constitutional monarchy. The king, from that point on, reigned but didn't rule. He still has tremendous influence, but he does not rule. And you have a constitution, and you have had a sort of a democracy since then. And what you've had, as you can see, is you have 5 constitutions since 1932. Now, this is not so unusual for a civil law country. Unlike the United States, where our Constitution rarely gets changed, it's only been amended, I think, 25 times, and 10 of them were done right at the inception of the Republic. Thailand follows the more European model. Their legal system is based on the Napoleonic Code. The Constitution is a roadmap for the current government. It's not a document to be followed for all times, with minimal instruction and the gaps filled in by the court or legislation. So I'm going to talk about the last of those constitutions, actually the last 2, 97 and 2007. Now the other part of the picture is Thailand has had 6 successful military coups in 76 years since 32. Almost all of them entirely by the army, sometimes assisted, and certainly usually with the consent of the Navy, but basically army coups. And they usually led to a government headed by a general, an active general. The positive thing was, as you can see, until 2006, the last coup was 1991. And for those fans of democracy, things were looking up in Thailand. They had an economic boom generally over the long run, and they haven't had a coup. However, up to, as you will hear, up to 2008, they never had a prime minister serve a full 4-year term and be reelected. So the Thais were always quite fickle about their government, generally dissatisfied, and generally voted them out after 1 term. And the current, I would say the current turmoil is to some extent a regional and to some extent a class issue. This is a little simplistic, but basically what it is the North and the Northeast against the central part and the South and Eastern part of Thailand. It's also a struggle to some extent between the old line elite Thais and the upstart businessmen who have made a lot of money. And it's also a rivalry between the king and the military on one side and these upstart politicians on the other. And the story really begins in 2000 March of 2000, when a businessman, very, very wealthy businessman, not part of the Thai elite, although he'd gone to military high school with some of the Thai elite who became and are now high army officers. This is the king. I'll get back to the king in a minute. Thaksin Shinawatra. Thaksin Shinawatra, who comes from Chiang Mai in the north, made a fortune in the satellite and telecommunications business. And with that money, he was able to form his own political party. This countered the old line political parties of Thailand, and he was viewed as a nouveau upstart. And he was very successful in the election of 2004. With the reforms in the House, he was able to form a government. He won. His Thai Rak party then formed a government. And by 2004, where there was still corruption and there's a lot of vote buying in Thailand, always has been, it's going to become a factor in what I'm going to tell you the rest of the hour. He still was well regarded, especially by the people in the north and the northeast. He had a populist program that he ran on and implemented to some extent, and he was operating, however, under a constitution, the Constitution of '97, which had a great many checks and balances on the executive. And he was a businessman. He wanted to get things done, go, go, go. He wasn't so interested in checks and balances. And this, by the time his first term ended in 2004, he was very sensitive to press criticism. He had banned some foreign periodicals that had been critical of him. But the economy had stabilized, but there was a growing disparity in wealth. People in the new elite were making much more money than some of his followers in the north and northeast. So there was still an undercurrent of unrest. Well, he ran for re-election again in 2004, and they had a 72% turnout among the Thai voters, quite a high turnout. And he had a great success. His party won 75% of the seats. He was riding high. As I said, it was the first time that a Thai prime minister had finished a 4-year term and been reelected. He promised to end poverty in 4 years. He did a lot for the landless farmers. He instituted a system of actually giving them paper titles to their farms. And then they have protection against arbitrary seizure. They also can mortgage, they can sell, they can inherit. They have a piece of paper. He improved the transportation system. He promulgated laws that would give more economic security to the elderly. And in an incredible piece of legislation that no one thought he could pull off, he instituted, in effect, a inexpensive public health system where you could go to the doctor and pay the equivalent of $5 for a doctor visit. Later, he was able to reduce that to zero. He put in public health medicine. No one thought Thailand could do that. But there were issues about his governance style that started to upset the middle class, the upper class, some of the academia, and in the end the army and the king. And that's what brought him down. One of the things he did was he wasn't very happy with the Constitution requiring him to funnel funds to unelected local councils. The idea was by doing that, that they would be able to avoid the general corruption inherent when money trickles down to the local populace. So he didn't like this. He could not control that kind of spending. So he rerouted that money through his appointed governors in violation of the Constitution. People were not happy about that. He also allowed those governors, he treated them like chief executive officers and allowed them to decentralize the planning and the budgets. This was somewhat controversial, to say the least. However, there were pluses, too. Thais have told me that before Thaksin came into office, when we went to try to persuade the Thai bureaucracy, which has been around for centuries and was formed out of the Thai the Thai elite class, the nobility became the bureaucracy in Thailand. They're still highly regarded, quite inbred. When you used to go in to ask a bureaucrat to do something that the regulations required, you had to bow down and scrape and go through everything. Thaksin ended that. He told the bureaucrats they were to act like civil servants. There were additional very serious allegations against him as we approached 2006. One was, as I said, he had built this communications megalith, and he sold it to a branch of the Singapore government for $1.9 billion. And the Thais were furious about that, and I'll let you know later why, but they were also afraid that that money was going to leave the country. Now, one of the reasons they were furious is that he had many conflicts of interest in building that empire. I'll give you one example is the Burmese, his neighbors, needed a communication satellite, and they wanted to put in a lot of mobile phones. And he persuaded, and I'm sure it wasn't difficult, the Export Bank of Thailand to underwrite the loan that the Thais would make to the Burmese for at cheap interest, and then the Burmese would use that money to rent time on Thaksin's satellite and to buy Thaksin's company's phones. The second thing, as I said, they had a Thai middle class and upper middle class had a big problem with his working around the checks and balances of the '97 Constitution, which they very much supported. Press censorship, as I said, was an issue. Thailand had become very socially polarized, much more than before, and he had managed to tick off the king. Now, the king, as you can see, has been around for quite a while. He started reigning in 1946. While he doesn't rule, I can think of about 4 instances in which he has stopped the Thai military from either shooting students who were demonstrating. He would arbitrate factions of the army who wanted to seize power. And by the way, there were many unsuccessful coups, some of which he thwarted during his reign. He was a big supporter of the farmers in the Northeast when they were even more impoverished than they are today. And he opened a lot of model farms and used a lot of his money, as did the Queen, to show them how they could profit from farming and improve their lives. Very popular figure. Somebody said that they've often heard Thais speak lovingly of him with great praise. You have to remember that there is a statute in Thailand with criminal penalties if you criticize the king. And it's being used now, as a matter of fact, against the opposition in Thailand, may be abused. So don't be, I mean, the king is quite beloved, but you will not hear any criticism of him in a public place because there are criminal penalties for that. So I said he had ticked off the king by some of his extra-constitutional actions and some of the way he had treated the royal family. And he had not managed the southern insurgency, which I may not get into yet, but this talk. There are 4 provinces in Thailand where the majority of the people's first language is Malay, and they are Muslim. There are plenty of Thais there, and there are plenty of Thais there who speak Thai as a first language, even if they are Muslim, but there are also plenty of the other. And they have been in an armed rebellion since 2004. Thaksin's never had much success, nor has the army, in putting it down. What happened was the middle class grew more and more upset at Thaksin's management of the government, and they all started wearing yellow shirts and marching in the street in greater and greater numbers, mainly in Bangkok. And there was, they formed an alliance called the PAD, and there was fear that there might be a coup d'etat for the first time since '91. But General Santai, who is a Muslim, said, no, coups are a thing of the past. Well, in the summer of 2006, these marches continued and grew, and Thaksin started to promote from within the army, and that's a big issue in Thailand, who gets promoted. The pensions are much better. You have to retire at 60, and the name of the game is to move up the ladder in the Thai army. And these promotions are very important, sought after. Thaksin started to promote his friends from that military academy, which he attended when he was in high school, over Santhai's men, the people that Santhai, as the commander-in-chief, wanted. That ticked off generally the regular army. And finally, the king made a speech in which he said the Thai courts should get active in enforcing the law. And the Thai courts, which were generally passive with respect to actions by the sitting government over all these years, suddenly became active. A case was brought alleging that the 2004 election was fraudulent. Now, almost every Thai election is fraudulent because there's vote buying on all sides. A businessman, American banker, once told me his colleague in Thailand in the banking business was a Sino-Thai, very wealthy, had a great big compound, and the American banker would stay there, and happened to be staying there on election day. And from early in the morning, the Thai banker sat under a great big tree in the compound, and all these politicians came by, and the Thai banker had millions of baht piled up and giving it out to either party so that he was, and that baht was to buy voters. They would go around as politicians and buy the voters. I'm sure there were Thais that took money from all sides and then voted the way they want. But the Thai elections have generally been corrupt. Well, the Constitutional Court found that the 2004 election was corrupt, and there would have to be another one. And Thaksin wasn't happy about that, but he said, okay, we'll hold it in the fall, in October, and meanwhile, I'll be the interim prime minister. The government hasn't fallen just because you say the election was fraudulent. And he then went to the UN, as most of the heads of states do, in September of 2006, to make a speech. And that's when the army acted. The king gave the go-ahead, and the army stepped in with General Santai, and they staged a bloodless coup. Nobody was killed. Some of Thaksin's ministers back in Thailand were put under arrest. There was military rule. There was a curfew. The press was suppressed. The Americans were not happy about that. They cut off the aid. President Bush cut off both the military and the civil aid. We still give some civil funds on the civil side. And Thaksin then, the rallies continued. And then Thaksin, and so they now had the first bloodless coup since 91. Thaksin then went to England. He attempted to get asylum in England. The England said no. He eventually settled in Abu Dhabi. And because he's in the communications business and very adept at these things and had plenty of money, as you can see, he went ahead and broadcast to his supporters at rallies by video conference. So he would keep them agitated. And he had a good deal of support in the North and the Northeast. And his supporters started to wear red shirts, and they formed an alliance called the PADD in opposition to the yellow. So we now get into 2007, and the Army, under pressure from the international community, passes a new constitution and says there will be elections in 2007. And by this time, the Constitutional Court has disbanded Thaksin's party. It said the penalty for the fraud was that 115 of the party officers can't stand for election for 5 years, including Thaksin. And you have a constitution which is less democratic than the previous one. The 2007 is less democratic, more appointed members of the legislature, as opposed to the other constitution where they were all elected. And none of this stops Thaksin. From abroad, he forms a new political party. He's got plenty of operatives, and they run in an election. The main opposition is the Democrat Party, which is a long-time party in Thailand, has ruled on occasion from time to time, is more Western-oriented, I would say, and more in the elite, old-time Thai tradition. It's not made up of nouveau business people or their cohorts. So one of the provisions in the Constitution which will become important is it says you must live on your salary if you're a politician, no outside income. That's an incredible concept up to now for Thailand. So these elections are held, and Thaksin's party, under a new name, wins again. And the next prime minister is an old pal. Here, by the way, are the yellow shirts massing in Bangkok. I mean, there are in the tens of thousands of Thais very upset at the Thaksin regime. So elected, when Parliament confers, they use essentially the British system. Parties win elections, and then the party meets and appoints and nominates someone to be the prime minister. They nominate an old-time politician who's one of Thaksin's colleagues named Samak. And Samak makes a mess of it. He really makes a mess of it. They tried to change, I don't know why they did this, Thaksin's health system. They first agreed and then withdrew their approval to a UNESCO heritage site for a temple that Cambodia had on the border. And the next thing you knew, the Thai army and the Cambodian army were squaring off on the border because the Thais had gone back on their word. And some of the old pals were appointed to posts. And the yellow shirts get even madder and madder. And about this time, Samak's hobby is cooking. And he's been on television before, cooking dishes like Martha Stewart. So he appears on a Thai television station program while he's prime minister, and he gets paid for a couple of appearances the great big sum of $185. So the Constitutional Court, Thailand has a Constitutional Court, which is to rule on violations of the Constitution and voting issues. That's very much a civil law concept. And the Constitutional Court says, you violated the Constitution, Prime Minister Samak, you have to step down. You can be appointed by your party again, but you've got to go through a reassembly of the parliament. Well, at this point, the party, it was called the PPP, Thaksin's party, decided they had enough of Samak. Things weren't working out. And they confer again, and they decide the next prime minister should be, who else but Thaksin's brother-in-law. He's a relatively Mr. Clean. He was in the education department for a while. He's a retired judge. And, but this really upsets the yellow shirts. And in the course of this, they make life very difficult for him. They break up a couple of ASEAN meetings. They seize eventually the 2 airports in Thailand, making it very difficult. Tourists couldn't get in and out. Cargo couldn't get in and out. Probably cost Thailand about $6 billion. Some of the tourists who were have told me about it. They said they didn't mind because the travel company had to put them up in a 5-star hotel and pay all the expenses until they could get them out of the country. The red shirts then go to the airport, and there's starts to be violence. And while the police and then the army are very reluctant to use violence against the demonstrators, eventually tear gas is used, and it turns out to be this Chinese tear gas, which can be lethal. And at a yellow rally, 2 of the demonstrators are killed by the tear gas, die by the tear gas. And some people start coming to the rallies with guns. So it's quite a turmoil for Thailand. The Queen steps in and goes to the funeral of one of the demonstrators who was killed by the tear gas, indicating where the monarchy is in all this. When the Constitutional Court steps in again, and they say that the election where the PPP was elected in 2007 was fraudulent, which is hardly a shock, because I said all Thai elections are fraudulent, and that Somchai will have to step down. The red shirts are furious about all this. They think the court is the handmaiden of the king and the military. And while this is all going on, Thaksin returns to Thailand briefly because there are 4 criminal cases against him and his family. One an income tax case, one based on that Burmese deal that I talked about, one involving a tax holiday that so-called Thai communications companies got where they didn't have to pay taxes. And the theory behind this was that the foreign companies would be kept out of competition with Thai companies in the communication business. And a 4th one. Well, he and his wife lose the land. One is a land fraud case. They lose the land fraud case. And she is sentenced to 2 years in jail. They appeal, and then they take it on the lam. And that's why they're now living in Dubai. The other 2 cases have now been decided against them. Their assets were seized. Most of their assets were frozen by the Thai government. He was the 4th richest man in Thailand. He dropped down to 16, and he's probably much poorer now because most of his assets have been seized as a result of these cases going against him. Well, his supporters are absolutely furious at all this. And finally, Parliament convenes, and there's going to be now a third vote. And one of the old line politicians from an area, and there are many of them in Thailand, they control fiefdoms. And there's one named Ne Win who controls a fiefdom over by Cambodia. And Ne Win flips. By this time, the breakup in the parliament is very close to parity between Thaksin's party and the Democrats. Ne Win flips. Why does he flip? Because his small party was promised the transportation ministry and I think it's the Interior Ministry. Transportation Ministry is worth a lot of money in kickbacks. So he flips, and now Thailand gets a new government with a new political party with a new prime minister, and that's Abhisit. Very different, as you will see, from Thaksin. Abhisit was born in England because his parents at that time were Thai medical professionals, I think, in residency. And he's bilingual. He speaks fluent, of course, Thai and fluent English. He's quite polished. He's quite part of the elite. He's a great favorite of the international community. He's an economist. He was educated at Eton and Oxford. And he forms a government. And he gives Ne Win the transportation ministry, and now they have to convert all the buses to compressed gas. And there's, I think there's a $1.7 billion they think Ne Win put in his pocket on a $4 billion contract. This is pretty much, Thai business as usual. So now the red shirts are absolutely furious at all this. They said, you're only in power because Ne Win flipped, you bought him off, and we want a new election. Abhisit says, no, we're not going to have an election. I'm still in the middle of my term. And so what do? Paid or not, and I'm sure some of them were paid, they came down to Bangkok. First, they broke up some meetings, some international meetings of ASEAN on Thai territory, very much embarrassing the Thai government. And one of them, the ASEAN ministers had to flee by helicopter from Pattaya because the red shirts had blocked off all the roads. And they come down to Bangkok in great numbers, and they settle in to one area of downtown Bangkok near Lumpini Park, if you've been there, and they're not moving. And some of them are armed, and a few military, middle-ranking generals, I think, have joined them, which really upset the army, kind of renegade generals. And they have an armed component, and although most of them are unarmed, and they set up barricades, and they're there for about 14 days. And finally, Abhisit unleashes the military to break it up. And I think about 90 people died, and about a larger number were injured. I can get the figure later. It's not terribly important. The red shirts set fire to one of the shopping centers, and it certainly hurt Thai economy and the Thai business, and the general appearance of Thailand to the world as the smiling Thais. Well, a number of the red shirts leaders escaped to Cambodia, and Thaksin then suddenly winds up for a while as a appointed advisor to the Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen. I can't get into that diversion, but the Cambodians love to stick it to the Thais when they can. So, and these red shirts have escaped to Cambodia. what's happened since then is sanity is somewhat returned. Abbasid and Hun Sen are now talking, the two prime ministers. Thaksin has been asked to resign and has resigned as an advisor to the Cambodian prime minister, and some of the red shirts have been extradited back to Thailand. Whether this is going to cause the Thai and Cambodian armies to eventually recede from the border, if they do, that will be good news. They've had some clashes. About 7 soldiers on total have died, and the Thais have stopped buying some of Cambodian products, much to the detriment of Cambodia's foreign trade. Whether things will return to normal is to be seen. The most amazing thing to me, and I haven't yet read what the reason given is, unless it's just extreme stiff-neckedness, stiff-necked attitude, is Abbasid said in the middle of this crisis to the red shirt component, and there are many political figures who are supporting the red shirts, either with money or appear at the rallies. Abbasid said to them, look, I really have 2 more years in power, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll convene elections, general elections again, he said in October of 2010, and let's see whether you carry the day. It may very well be that they would carry the day, but they rejected that. They said, no, 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 we want you to quit now and have elections now. So the result was they got thrown out of Bangkok, and some of them died. And it probably going to be elections in about a year, I think. Why did Abbasid say October? Here is the answer. There, by the way, are the red shirts on buses and the flags and all, many of them from the north and northeast. The answer is that the Thai army promotions that I said are very important come up in late September, early October. Abbasid wanted to be prime minister when those promotions were scheduled because General Prayat, who is the new commander-in-chief, is a big Abbasid supporter. He wanted to make sure the commander-in-chief would be favorable to the Democrat Party. And he wanted to appoint a new police chief. For a while he was blocked. He didn't get the candidate he wanted, but he got his second choice. So he now at least has control of the police and the army. And so the Democrats and the king and the army and I suppose the bureaucracy to a large extent can make sure that in the next election they at least will have a seat at the table for the next year, and in the next election they will have a power base. I reached 2 conclusions out of this. One is that I am, in a sense, gratified to see that the Thai courts have at least stepped in to try to invoke penalties for fraudulent elections and vote buying. I think, in essence, Thailand would be better without all that. If they're going to become a mature democracy, having been at it for 70-something years, it's time to start not to do that. And I'm also gratified that there was a charge in the Election Commission against the Democrat Party, because they probably buy seats in elections. And it's now up before the Constitutional Court whether they are going to lose, some of them, their political rights for 5 years. And the red shirts are waiting to see whether justice is really blind. I think that's a plus. The second part of it is you may have an instance here in which the majority of the populace, and they win out in an election, in a free and fair election, may really want the elite to change. And that's a difficult proposition for the Thais. There are many power bases in Thailand, but the elite power bases, as I've said before, are the king, the military, the bureaucracy, and these old-line civilian politicians, some of whom are retired generals, by the way. And it may very well be that well over 50% of the Thais want to open up the power base and to have a more thriving democracy. And whether that will lead to chaos is an issue. The king is 82 years old. The king's health is not terrific. He's been in and out of the hospital. Generally, the appointment of the next king is done within the palace. There are groups within the palace. The king has a son who was a playboy, is probably not a genius, and two daughters. One has a PhD in history, and the other one is fairly astute, and they've all been involved in charity events. The chances are that the son is going to be appointed. Modern Thailand has never had a queen who ruled or even reigned. So with that summary, I'd like to take questions if anyone has any. You'll certainly want to keep your eyes on all this. Anybody? Yes. Yeah, the question is that the PhD daughter might be able to advise the son, and he might be a good ruler. The king is going to be very important in all this. As I say, in many instances, the king has mediated serious constitutional crises and averted coups. So, yes, that is a possible scenario, and a positive one, perhaps. Yes, you had a question. Yes, I think I looked at my notes. Yeah, the answer is 1939, and it was changed by Phibal Songham, who ruled twice in Thailand. This is during his first reign, when Thailand took a nationalistic turn to the right on the eve of World War II. And in addition to establishing the Thai Y, that we think of when they greet, that is not a centuries-old greeting. He put that in at the beginning to show deference to authority, and it's stuck since then. He changed the name of the country to Thailand to give it a more nationalistic bent. As you know, it means land of the free in the Thai language. But that's when it happened. And as far as I can determine from my notes, I'd have to look further. I believe he was an elected at that time. He was head of parliament, although he was a military man. This is not unusual in Thailand. And the military was very involved in Thai politics. They had, in effect, staged the coup, which made Thailand, 7 years ago, which had made Thailand a constitutional monarchy. Anybody else before we go swimming? Okay. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.